Chapter 3 Developments. In the end, Izuku survives his mom's birthday party. Sure, it's a bit stressful, mostly because Inko is torn between being terrified that something was going to happen to her baby now that he is a supervillain, and being thoroughly happy and proud about him being a supervillain. He also really doesn't want Hisashi to start interrogating him about All Might's apparent public humiliation. There is no lying to Izuku's father. He always finds out. And without lying, Japan's newest supervillain would have failed to hide the fact that All Might survived because Izuku wanted him to. That would have led to more troublesome discoveries, such as how Izuku secretly hopes to make All Might hug his sister with her quirk active simply to bring him back to his full strength, because that would be really cool. Izuku is a villain, yes, and he is reasonably comfortable with that designation. The word has a lot of meanings these days, either way. But he has a strict code for what he was okay with in his business, and he genuinely thinks that heroes who genuinely do their best to save people, so All Might, Genium, basically every rescue hero and underground heroes, they're just the coolest thing ever. It kind of makes it easier to look at his own reflection in the mirror, but he'll still fight them if it's necessary, and he hopes that they won't corner him with enough force to resort to lethal means. Besides, his dad made a rather funny face each time he saw Izuku's collection of All Might merch. He once walked into the kitchen in the morning to see his two kids wearing matching All Might onesies, and his reaction was positively hilarious. He was visibly torn between cooing how his little girl looks cute and going out to crucify the family members of whoever designed the onesies. Izuku considers this a form of gauging the strength of his father's retirement conviction. He doesn't want his father to unretire himself. Japan probably wouldn't survive that, especially with All Might being so weak right now. The League wants Japan to survive, for now. And then there's also the part where All Might has the moral qualities that Izuku would like for his father to have, to make his son less confused as to what to feel about him. Izuku is generally confused about a lot of things nowadays. Karaoke is reasonably interesting. Mustard is there too. They always call him Mustard, since he really dislikes being called with his real name, and besides, that name's a League secret. They briefly celebrate Izuku's supervillain status, and then they proceed to thoroughly humiliate him in public by making him sing songs, although mostly it's just him stuttering. The only saving grace for the League of Villains members is that they have to humiliate themselves too. And then Tenko announces that he wants to go to the arcade, to the surprise of absolutely no one. So they follow him. They spend a fairly pleasant time there. The highlight of the evening is probably Mustard going on a rant that the Thunderbolt that died in the USJ was an imposter, and that All Might is actually Endeavor and the real Thunderbolt wearing a costume, as they couldn't decide which one of them should be number one hero, so they decided to become one together. At this point, nobody in the League is willing to hazard a guess whether Mustard actually believed his conspiracy theories. They just like to see him all worked out because of them pointing out the flaws in his logic. It all still feels surreal to Izuku. He did it. He is a villain. A supervillain. Up until the day he did technically violate a handful of laws on a daily basis, but he was still just a criminal at best. The government didn't even know about his existence, so it was as if he wasn't doing anything. But now, he did it. Sure, there are 3 different levels of supervillains, and he is the lowest one, but it's still the S rank. Even if he dies tomorrow, he'll still be remembered, in whatever will be left of Japan after his father's revenge rampage, that is. Hell, someone out there is probably already making his very own villain merch, which is illegal, but honestly, also kind of cool. Izu... He wakes up from his thoughts only to see an unfamiliar girl's face very, very close to his. You were mumbling again? His brain snaps back in place. This is the face Himiko wears for the outing. He's thankful for the interruption. mumbling about his status as a supervillain in public is a serious security risk. The arcade is a loud place, but not that loud. Um, thank you, Hemi. She gives him one of her wide and slightly creepy smiles. It's probably only the fangs that add the creepy factor to it. So, I think we need to have a talk and confirm some things? She looks at him with a mixture of questioning and encouragement on her face. She is always unfailingly encouraging. It's one of her biggest positive sides, which she had a number of. So, you, like me? She nods. But do you like me? Or do you, like me? He's probably blushing furiously. Why on earth does he find it harder to talk about this stuff than to plan an assault on the second or third best guarded locations in Japan? I love you, silly. She makes some sort of salute. You're the cutest, most adorable thing I've ever seen in my life, and any girl that doesn't fall for you obviously has horrible taste. Izuku isn't sure if being cute and adorable fits a criminal mastermind. He once asked his father what was the weirdest quirk in his collection, and it turned out to be one that made everyone around you perceive you as something cute and pettable. The results of his father using said quirk were just absolutely unholy and actually gave Izuku nightmares for a while. He eventually decides he could probably work with the cute bit. It would certainly make him original among the supervillains. Alright, he braces himself for the big talk. So, does that mean you're my girlfriend? Their relationship was complicated from the start. Kurogiri had introduced her to him when he was 10 years old, and on his best way to become a completely asocial recluse together with his best friend Tanko. He was already training under his father to become his successor back then, at least when his father was actually conscious, since it was only a year since his fight with All Might. And Hazashi apparently decided that having some social skills is a good idea for a villainous mastermind. Himiko stood up to the task. Izuku and Tanko, frankly, were pissed at the obnoxious and loud girl that didn't even know how to play the simplest video game. But she didn't care about their grumbling, and instead installed herself into their lives, like a giant mutated tick that refused to die no matter what you did. And that was a quote from one of Tanko's rants. And they all got older, and Izuku noticed that the distance between him and Himiko, which was already abysmally small, started shorting rapidly. Hugs, cuddling, unexpected kisses on the cheek, and so on started, and he was the only one recipient of the additional affection. It was confusing. He still doesn't know how to react to that. His supervillain education didn't cover that. Yes, Himiko replies. It isn't an answer to his question, more like an announcement. She probably decided that he is now her boyfriend a few months ago and acted on it, completely ignoring the fact that he didn't technically agree to any of it. Sure, he kissed her back once, on an impulse. Tanko came upon the two of them facing opposite walls in the room, equally red and completely out of it. He later bought Izuku a romance game and ranted about how three-dimensional girls aren't worth his player 2's time. Tanko's kinda nice, in his own weird way. Himiko is nice too, in her own weird way. Oh, that's nice. Izuku is really out of his depth. Also, my parents want to meet you. That breaks her. Himiko Toga is moody, or more like emotionally complicated. She is a solid contender for the position of the world's most extrovert person, yes. She has absolutely no problems with suddenly and randomly kissing her crush, which is a way nicer way of describing the boyfriend unaware of that status, since it sounds kind of yandere. But she has absolutely no resistance to being on the receiving side of, well, pretty much anything relationship related. The kissing incident is a good example. She was totally alright when she kissed him, but when he did the same thing to her, she reacted at the same level of shyness that he did. Not only did she start to stutter, but she couldn't face him. Not to mention the blushing. There was a lot of blushing, made much more visible by their pale skin. Izuku does not want to imagine Himiko Toga, who didn't have a relatively sane villain friend during her childhood. She'd probably end up being a psychopathic murderer or something. She would make a nice duo with Tango in such a world. Izuku got his best friend therapy for only one particular issue. Tango had a lot more. Your parents? She blushes furiously before making a step back and hiding between her hands. It's... Mind Screw is probably busy watching cat videos on the internet, which is regretful as Izuku can't use his quirk to restart Himiko. Hitoshi only joined relatively recently, and the armored train of Himiko Toga's extrovertism has yet to overwhelm his resistance to spending time together outside of the base. Am I going to be the first one to meet them? She manages to calm herself enough to ask the question. He keeps his life separate from his villainous aspirations. The League is kept in the dark when it comes to Legion's family. Since most of the members have their own complicated backstories, they decided that he probably has a valid reason for secrecy, and to let it slide. There was only one exception. Izuku's family life was the second most popular field for Mustard's conspiracy theories. Well, technically speaking, Kurogiri babysat my sister once. The teleporter looks scary, but is extremely soft on the inside when children are involved. And Eri trusted her brother when he said that Kurogiri was a very nice person. Izuku still remembers returning home that day to see Kurogiri sitting on the floor in the dining room, practically covered in hero stickers. The Warper seemed content with his life on that day. So, other than that, no, you are going to be the... She doesn't let him finish. You have a sister? Himiko latches onto the subject with the ferocity of, well, a vampire. A starving one. Yes, and I'm very sorry about that, but she is the cutest girl ever, and you are not changing my mind, Izuku replies promptly. Also, you are going to agree with me once you meet her. Bakugo Katsuki is very easy to anger. He is impulsive, he refuses to back down from any sort of challenge, and he has a long list of things that will push him over the edge. He isn't constantly angry. The extras surrounding him don't know shit about him. But it is rather easy for him to go off. He wants to be a true combat-oriented hero. He needs to be strong. Anger brings strength. He isn't an idiot, though. Unless something really extreme happens, he can be both angry and think logically, even if none of the students around him seem to notice. Tactics are useful. Beating villains in terms of strength is one thing, but beating them in the strength and brain department at once is even better. But that's where things stop making sense. He's supposed to be angry right now, but instead he feels confused. Is anger a circle? Can you get so angry that you get back to the start and no longer feel angry? Or is Bakugo too angry for his heart to keep up, and so his brain suppresses the reaction until the anger declines to a manageable level? A bunch of shitty villains attacking UA wasn't a bad thing on its own. He considers villains to be stepping stones for himself. He needs a lot of those to become the #1 hero, so he may as well start early. And then he fucked up. Sure, he got a good hit on the Misty fucker, which was more that could be said about the extras that he's forced to study with, but then he charged at the other villain. He has no idea why something in their leader just made him explode. And not only did he let the villains almost kill their hobo teacher, which happened because he decided to risk his own life to save Bakugo, but he also discovered that Deku was alive, and a villain, apparently a supervillain now. And he didn't even bother fighting him for real. He had one of his own extras take him down and then properly ignored him, before using what was obviously a fucking quirk to fucking kill the number 3 hero. Bakugo Katsuki decides that he isn't raging around yet simply because his mind fails to process what happened. Deku exploding Thunderbolt in front of him just broke him. His mind fails to comprehend the image. I see that you are awake. Bakugo flinches and looks around the hospital room. Someone furry is sitting on the chair near his bed with a small laptop in its hands. Or paws. Yes, those are paws. What the fuck are you? He's had a bad day. He really doesn't want to make it worse. Whoever this furry fuck is should just fuck off and let him figure things in peace. I am Nezu, the UA principal. The rat bear replies calmly. Something in his voice is pissing Bakugo off. And then he understands what he just heard. And that made his day way, way worse. He just referred to the school's principal as a what rather than a who. And it's Nezu. Bakugo's idol is All Might, but he lives close enough to UA to hear the legends of Nezu's viciousness and absolute lack of tolerance towards certain things, such as people not treating him as a person. I suspect that I know what you are thinking about, Bakugo Katsuki. Nezu's voice is calm, but something in it makes the student tremble internally. I am going to let it slip. You are young, after all, and I know full well that you have a tendency to speak before thinking. If anyone else told him that, he would explode. But this time, that isn't even on the table. You know who Legion is, Nezu announces. He called you Kachan, and you raged, calling him a quirkless Deku. You will describe your relationship to this villain immediately. If I catch you lying or omitting the truth, you will be expelled, and I will personally make sure that you will never be enrolled in any hero school in this country. Bakugo heard that Nezu is normally a perfectly sane and decent individual, unless he's switched into his little genocide mode. Unless Deku greatly overestimated the sanity and decency part of one of his hero rants that somehow stuck in Bakugo's memories. The student is witnessing just said mode. Bakugo confesses, as if a dam breaks, letting words flow through, crushing the lives of hundreds. The day of the attack on the USJ was one of the worst in Nezu's life. He was caught completely off guard by a group composed mostly of children. It was a humiliation, yes, but he could live through that. He likes challenges, and cracking down on this league of villains appeared to be one. The real problem is that it is a distraction, and he does not need those. The situation in Japan is precarious. Way too many powerful groups, increasingly autocratic, and inept, as it always goes together, government. Hero Public Safety Commission installing it as a shadowy power behind the ailing democracy. Hokkaido practically seceding after a narrowly thwarted coup by the Meta Liberation Army. And it's not like they managed to get the true supporters of the coup, only a mob and some turncoat heroes that almost overthrew the government with their numbers. Quirkless Liberation Front, Creature Rejection Clan, and Human Supremacy Party, the Levelers, and almost a dozen more villain groups rampaging around. The symbol of peace was never more important. It's a giant casting its shadow over Japan. Redestro would have long ago started an open war if he wasn't afraid of All Might sending him flying through Hokkaido to Russia with just a punch. All Might was the symbol of what heroism should be about. Someone to look up to remind other heroes what they are supposed to be. And now, a group of brilliant young people almost overwhelmed him. If he died, no, if he was even wounded, Nezu doesn't even want to imagine the chaos that would ensue. The country would likely collapse overnight. In a better world, most, if not all, of the League members would have made for fantastic heroes. Most of them didn't even display their quirks, yet they managed to take down several pro-heroes, kill Thunderbolt, and corner All Might. Nezu has to admit that it is simply breathtaking, but now, They're a wild card. Nezu isn't even sure if they're UA's enemies. If he's to be honest, he considered eliminating Thunderbolt himself. UA is a fortress and he dislikes nosy people. Instead of a completely unknown group did that for him, while making the world think they came to kill All Might, the most powerful of Nezu's chess pieces. All that the Rat Bear had to do now was to pretend to be saddened by Thunderbolt's demise. But the League's astounding debut is going to complicate the chessboard even further. All of that because a completely unrelated school messed up. Nezu is going to completely annihilate it simply out of spite, and to improve his mood a bit. He does things for such reason from time to time. If the said school was slightly less Quirkist, perhaps Nezu would be spending his day with Midoriya Izuku, preparing him to be his successor. He certainly has the brain for it. The tactical acumen and quirk analysis skill displayed by him during the attack make the Rat Bear salivate. Using Kurogiri to take down both 13 and Snipe by turning their quirks against them, forcing Eraserhead to deal with 2 talented melee experts with one constantly trying to blindside him, taking full advantage of the weaknesses of the Eraser quirk. Mustard on standby to gas Eraserhead if decaying vampires failed to take him down while simultaneously suppressing his quirk by limiting visibility. Preparing the distractions to keep All Might away, actually figuring out All Might's weaknesses. According to Bakugo, Midoriya started to analyze quirks right after learning to write. How good does he have to be today? He would gladly exchange Bakugo for Midoriya. Alas, water under the bridge. Now he has to eliminate Legion in his league before they will grow even more dangerous. And Bakugo Katsuki might be a useful pawn in this endeavor. 2 months of detention, Nezu announces when Bakugo finishes his hurried confession. Mandatory anger management classes, and psychological consultations. Consider yourself on probation, and if I ever hear anything even remotely discriminatory from you before you graduate, you will be expelled. The same will happen if your temper issues endanger other students or a member of the faculty. If Nezu is to be honest, Bakugo was as much a victim as Midoriya. Sure, he was a bully, that much couldn't be denied, but nobody has ever told him what he was doing was wrong. There is no genuine malice in this child, only acute insecurities and wrongly understood kindness. If Nezu read him well, he started attacking Midoriya as a form of discouraging his friend from going after heroics, which he perceived as too dangerous for a quirkless boy. Add peer pressure and irresponsible adult to the mix, and you get Japan's youngest supervillain, and an aspiring hero that has yet to understand his dream of becoming #1 hero is dead and buried. Legion is eventually going to be unmasked. Someone will make a connection. Driving a child into becoming a menace to society through bullying is enough to stain his image forever. The best that Bakugo can hope for was becoming another Endeavor. So close yet so far from the top. He leaves the hospital room, leaving the shattered remnants of his student behind. Nezu hopes that Izuku is a late bloomer. There are cases of supposedly quirkless people developing powerful quirks much later than normal. Eclipse of the Quirkless Liberation Front is a good example. She was 17 years old when her quirk kicked in. The alternative, it is too far to comprehend. 3 days after the USJ raid, the villain network finally catches up with the events. Legion's account is promoted from an unranked passerby to an S-rank villain. The same thing happens to the other members of the League. Villain network is something between Discord and Facebook, but for villains, on the international scale. Izuku's father didn't elaborate on its works and how it avoided international scrutiny, but he did claim that it was reasonably secure. On the other hand, you never know if the villain that you're talking to isn't an undercover hero with an expertly falsified criminal record. Caution was advised. Theoretically, anyone could join it, but you don't get to access anything interesting unless your country declares you a villain and mysterious administrators of the network confirm your credentials. It is underwhelming, the least. Izuku expected something more. On the other hand, most villains aren't exactly the friendliest of sort. If anything, the League of Villains was probably an exception to the rule, since its members got along quite nicely. He will probably end up using it to chat with the other League members. Some of them don't live in Legion's secret lair, oddly enough, and those that did seem to be very into the internet, especially in the evening. Plus, you would probably ask some villains for an autograph through it. Delivering it will be a pain, though. He creates a private chat and invites the League members to it. Tenko joins in immediately, unsurprisingly. Hitoshi is right after him. His friends would benefit from having a life aside from the internet. He hears a faint knock at the door of his study. Come in. Tenko is playing downstairs, so the chances of it being a hero are rather abysmal. He would have heard screams, curses, and general combat noise, and probably the entire building collapse due to Tenko decaying walls. It was Himiko, in her shy and super awkward mode. Izuku? In a very shy and awkward mode, he corrects himself. So, I've been wondering, what should I wear to the meeting? Seeing Himiko actually conscious about what she's wearing is a new experience. She attacked UA while wearing a villain outfit mostly composed of just a school uniform, just with some added knives. He really isn't even sure what school she took the uniform from, and if he's to be honest, he's not sure he wants to know. It really doesn't matter, Izuku replies. Wear whatever you're comfortable with. Your standard clothes are totally alright. He kinda likes him, especially the short skirt, but he would rather go to Tartarus than admit that publicly. Oh. She isn't sure what to answer, most likely. And, the face? She adds while covering hers with her hands. There has been a serious misunderstanding between them, Izuku understands. He stands up from the chair and approaches her, leaving the computer behind and gently pulling her hands off her face. She responds with some stammering while doing her best not to look at him. Himiko Toga. The official tone makes her finally look at him, but it's clear that she was struggling. My parents are villains. They are absolutely proud of me for staging the raid on the USJ. The reason why they want to meet you is because they figured everything out from my reaction to my mom's teasing me about you being my girlfriend when the news announced your new status as a villain. They know who you are, they know what you're doing for a living, and they have absolutely no problem with that. She's staring at him, so he decides to add something more. Just be yourself, alright? The resulting hug almost finishes Legion's career as a villain. It also makes him forget to explain just what sort of villains his parents are. I can wait. Right? Chapter 4. Emotions. Kurogiri opens a work gate in front of Izuku's home soon after the sunset. Oh. Himiko looks around with a surprise written on her face. Izuku can understand that. His home is a small residence surrounded by a well-trimmed garden in the middle of a forest. Sure, there is a road. Someone might have asked awkward questions if there weren't any. Warp quirks are rare after all. But other than that, it's just the forest. Izuku prefers not to mention just how rich his family was in front of the League of Members. Most of them were either impoverished before turning to villainy, or worse than that. Himiko's parents were relatively well off, but since her quirk was villainous, her childhood was tough. Father has an investment company, Izuku says in an almost apologetic tone. He doesn't mention that he also invests a lot of money in the League from his personal retirement funds. The company itself is clean, though. Oh yeah, you said he was a villain. Himiko is back to her normal self, and Izuku chuckles. Retired villain, he explains. He uses the company as an explanation for the money. Actually, I forgot to mention something. He admonishes himself for that fiercely. What is it, Zuku? My parents are retired super villains. She stares at him in surprise. I forgot the super bit when I told you about them. That's my bad. Do I know them? She is visibly excited. Sure, she didn't reach the level of fanboy as present in Izuku, but unless you're Tenko Shimura, you probably can't spend childhood with Izuku Midoriya without catching some of it. Mom used to be known as Mischief. Himiko's eyes widen in shock. The famous thief? Izuku nods. He remembers Mom crying when Mr. Compress got interviewed by someone and mentioned her as an inspiration, along with the peerless thief Oji Haruma. Then again, he remembers his mom crying about a lot of things. And an S rank in her prime. Izuku replies with pride. At least one supervillain on his family tree that can be genuinely and unquestionably proud of it. Now she is a very dedicated housewife and mother. Very emotional. Don't get startled when she starts crying. She does that a lot. I see. She makes a thoughtful expression for a moment. Quite unlike her, if Izuku is to be honest. Not that she's stupid. Quite the opposite, in fact, but she tended to be way too expressive to make such reserved faces. And your dad? Now, things are going to get tricky. You remember All Might's time limit thing? She nods. That is because the last time they met, my dad tore out All Might's stomach and lung. Himiko.exe has stopped responding. But father ended up spending 6 years on life support after it, and while he did make a full recovery, he decided it was time to retire and focus on his family. Izuku continues. All Might thinks that his nemesis is dead, and the government never admitted that he exists, as he preferred the public to think that the symbol of peace is untouchable. So I guess he's something like a quadruple S-class villain? So reality is crazier than Mustard's conspiracy theories, Himiko manages to respond. Wow. Like, wow. He looks at her with an apologetic smile. Yeah, it kind of is, he adds. Also, before we enter, I need to quickly run you through a list of several critical rules. Rules? Rule number 1. My sister is the cutest being under the sun, and is too pure to be exposed to something as unsightly as villainy. When she's with us, we do not talk about villainous things. Izuku announces with a serious expression. Okay. Himiko is back to her cheerful self again. What's next? Rule number 2. If you notice something is wrong with our dog, do not talk about it. My mom and sister don't know, and it's going to stay like that. This time, Himiko stares at him strangely. Something wrong? Like what? She appears to be a bit distraught by that rule, but he shrugs. She'll know when she'll know. Otherwise, Izuku isn't sure he wants her to know. Not important. Rule number 3 is that we do not talk about All Might when Dad is around. He's been United States of Smashed at least twice, and he considers All Might to be his arch-nemesis. He's kind enough to ignore my merch, but that's only because he knows that I'd set fire to his suit collection if he destroyed it. That's as far as he goes. Noted. What else, Zuku? She adds. She seems entertained by all of it, and he has no idea why. What happens in this residence stays in this residence. He knows that she can hold a secret well when she wants to, but he still decided to mention it. Something less obvious? She replies with a chuckle. The entrance door is slightly open. Izuku pushes it open a bit more. No light. Now that is suspicious. He can't imagine anyone crazy enough to attack All for One in his home. Only All Might has a chance of winning that fight single-handedly, but if it was him, there'd be no home left. Several top 10 heroes with a plan, or several supervillains would have a chance too, but Redestro, Eclipse, and Mr. Compress cooperating to take down All for One is about as likely as All Might and All for One working together for world peace. And without those three, all you would have left were some minor supervillains. Maybe save for Purity and Beast, but those were assholes that nobody liked. Then again, he can scarcely imagine the top 10 heroes mobilizing without infighting. Nezu and the Public Hero Safety Commission are at each other's throats. Nezu didn't start a civil war yet because he didn't want Destro to jump at the victor's throat. The same goes for the HPSC. Night vision, reflex boost. He could see clearly now, without switching on the light. Himiko was following him soundlessly, and with a knife. Well, he did tell her to be herself during the meeting, but he still didn't expect her to take knives. Midoriya Izuku is sometimes a bit of a dummy. They searched the house until finally Izuku notices something odd. Swivel chair in the middle of the room. Massive swivel chair in the middle of the room. Light is suddenly switched on, and Izuku is blinded for a second before he deactivates night vision. As a result, he misses most of the grand reveal. When his eyesight comes back, All For One is already facing them, sitting on the chair in one of his best suits with a white cat on his lap. "Welcome to my evil lair, young villains," Hisashi Midoriya announces in his best villain voice. It is absolutely terrifying, even to Izuku, who has known him for years. Himiko jumps back on instinct. Izuku isn't surprised. His father is intimidating, even when he isn't doing anything actively malicious. Himiko's instincts are well honed. He is sure that she would immediately recognize Hisashi as mortal danger, even without Izuku's warnings about who the man is. Swivel chair? Really? Izuku curses himself for having the idea to bond with his slightly estranged father over old movies. Why exactly did All For One like Bond films so much is anyone's guess. Maybe he related to the villains. "Oh, I always wanted to try it." His dad shrugs while letting the cat jump off of him. "I even borrowed a cat from Kurogiri." "You're the worst," Izuku replies. "Stop complimenting me, Izuku." It's a bit of an inside joke to them. "I think it's time for some introductions. Also, you can put down your knife, vampire. Izuku's friends are safe in this house. Unless..." He's probably trying to make the SSSS rank villain equivalent of "don't you dare make a mess in my home," but he accidentally ramps up the intimidation factor. Himiko freezes. Midoriya Inko might have gotten a bit chubby after she retired, but she can still move quietly. Quietly enough, in fact, to sneak up on All For One himself and suddenly slap his head with a rolled newspaper. "What the?" he tries to ask, but is interrupted. "Midoriya Hisashi!" All For One freezes. He recognizes the tone. The time for jokes is over. "Can't you see how terrified she is of you? Your son finally brought home a friend, and you're about to give them a heart attack with your antics. Have you no shame?" In Izuku's opinion, All For One got interest in his mom simply because she was probably the only person out there who didn't cower in terror in front of him. That or her cooking, either one works. Unlike him, she actually has an idea of how normal people work on a day-to-day basis too. He was learning things from her, but he was still a bit off. There is a reason why he governed his company through video conferences from home. He isn't ready to be unleashed upon the non-villainous world. "All right, I apologize," Izuku's father announces. "That was uncalled for. I am sorry for scaring you." His intimidating aura lessens significantly. Inko gets to Himiko, takes the knife out of her hand, and gently hugs her and pats her back. Izuku joins her from the other side. "It's all right, sweetie," Inko says in her most reassuring tone, and Himiko Toga suddenly remembers that breathing is a thing. Izuku has to admit that Himiko's vision could start in a better way. Even after Inko consoles her a bit, she is still rather shaken. He isn't surprised. It worries him a lot. He actually likes her in the like way, or at least he thinks so. And he doesn't want his father to influence their relationship in any way. For example, by scarring Himiko mentally for life. Eri shows up a few minutes later in her All Might onesie. She's probably planning on going to bed soon, so it was a given. All For One smiles widely, but Izuku can see the existential pain in his eyes. Judging by the expression on Himiko's face, she decided that Izuku was correct when he said that his sister was the cutest thing ever. Himiko likes cute things. And people. Hello, Eri says, her big eyes set on Himiko. Oh, hi. Himiko's smile is genuine, although slightly exhausted. You must be Izuku's sister. And you. You're Izu's wife, Eri announces with a straight face, slightly tinted with an I'm so smart expression. Himiko breaks again, this time together with Izuku. Inko makes it sound like she just choked on something. Hisashi is the only person to remain sane, and in all likelihood is having a blast while doing so. It's just that he doesn't show it. Eri. The girl looks up at her adopted father. They're friends. Well, I admit there is a possibility of marriage further down the line. They are way too young for that. The mention of the possibility of marriage only messes everyone up more. It was intentional, of course. Truly, All for One's evil is limitless. They are eating a late dinner together, talking about some random things. Eri is around, so they couldn't have the proper talk. The food is, of course, delicious. At some point in the meal, All for One's restraint reaches its limits. I have a question for you, he says towards Himiko. You know that Izuku likes analyzing quirks. I happen to be a bit of a quirk analyst myself. An understatement of the century, in Izuku's opinion. Both sentences, in fact. I am extremely curious about your quirk. If it isn't a problem, could you tell me what it is? He is probably curious about the quirks of the entire League of Villains. So many new yet powerful villains with unknown quirks. He spent 2 centuries gathering hundreds, if not thousands, of interesting quirks inside his body, and certain things stuck, even if he promised Izuku not to steal any more of them after retiring. Himiko responds by transforming into Izuku. Her clothes stay the same, and seeing himself wearing girls' clothes, in front of his parents no less, is a little weird. Full physical transformation. All for One is suitably impressed. And an almost instant one. A wonderful quirk. I assume there are some requirements for the transformation, yes? Yeah, Himiko replies while changing back to her natural self. But I'm not sure if I can speak about it here. She is considerate enough not to mention the blood-drinking part in front of Eri or Izuku's parents. Eri raises her hand. Is it about sex? She asks with an absolutely innocent face. Izuku chokes on his katsudon. Himiko freezes. Inko looks at her adopted daughter with terror on her face. Hisashi's face is one of a traumatized soldier after years of trench warfare who was just told that the war had started again and it's time to go back to the trenches. Where did you hear that word? Inko manages to utter. Izuku can see the dam is all ready to burst. You and Daddy were talking about Izu yesterday, Eri announces, completely unaware of what's happening. Dad asked you if it was time to have the talk about sex with Izu, and if it wasn't already too late for that. Excuse me for a moment. Hisashi stands from the table and disappears into another room. They can all hear a muffled scream coming from it a few seconds later. Mom starts crying while trying to explain to Eri that it is something that she was too young to know the details about. Eri finally decides to go to sleep. It happens right after a large dog of undetermined breed walks into the room as if it owned it, limping a bit. What happened to it? Himiko asks. She does like animals, although only some of them. Either the cute, so cats, or the fluffy, so large dogs. This one is hard to classify concerning its breed, but there is certainly a lot of fluff. We don't know, actually, Inko replies with a worried look on her face. Hisashi took him to a vet, and there are no actual wounds, but he still walks around like this. This is the second day of it, but I think it's getting better. She and her husband vanish from the room, probably to help Eri settle down and for her bedtime story. It is at that point that Himiko connects the dots and turns her face towards Izuku. You didn't. She looks shocked. I did, Izuku replies. I panicked, so I told Kurogiri to warp in my dog. He has a really nasty quirk. A few, in fact, but he has yet to explain the whole no-move business to the League. They knew that he had something prepared, together with a mysterious doctor, in case things went wrong, and he did get a few questions about the whole bioengineered super weapon after the attack. That talk had to happen sooner or later. Preferably later. You had your dog fight All Might, the #1 hero, she says, obviously still in shock. And your dog almost won. Please don't rub salt into my wounds. And she has yet to see his room. Things are going to get awkward. That's a lot of All Might, Himiko says, entering his room and taking a look at all the merchandise scattered through it. Well, he's my idol. Kind of. Izuku replies. He does his best not to think about how there was now a girl in his room. Talking about All Might feels significantly less awkward. He is reasonably confident on the subject, unlike the other one. It isn't just All Might, though. He has some Edgeshot, Mariko, Gang Orca, and Best Jeanist stuff, too. And a handful of smaller things themed after underground heroes that are mostly handmade, including a large Eraserhead figurine, plus some Rescue Hero things. At least 70% of his bedroom are All Might themed, though. He is a villain, and another villain just saw his room, full of hero merch. It is the right time to explain some things. The last thing he wants is Himiko misunderstanding what she just saw, but then again, can it really be misunderstood? I'm a villain, and I know it, Izuku says in a serious tone. Himiko managed to pry her eyes off the merch scattered throughout the room and looks at him. But I simply cannot find it in myself to hate people who are actually willing to risk their lives for others. It's the only thing that I really disagree on my father with. They talked about it a lot, and eventually Hisashi gave up on trying to persuade Izuku. He accepted that his son had a different definition of villainy, and they both agreed to disagree on it. For as long as Izuku didn't apply to a hero school or go vigilante, that is. So, while there are horrible people among the heroes, like Thunderbolt, people that I'm willing to end, I just can't hate the idea behind it all. I guess that it does make me a bad villain, but... She grabs his hands and moves closer to him. That's what makes you an awesome villain, Zuko, Himiko says quietly. You know what my past was like. I had a villainous quirk, so I was told to keep it hidden from the world despite it hurting me. Everyone kept telling me that I was a villain in the making, despite the fact that I didn't want to be one. She pauses for a second, as if gathering courage. Villains were scary, but then I met you. The kindest person that I ever knew, and an aspiring villain. The person who showed me how to be myself without hating who I was. Izuku is on the verge of crying, and strangely enough, he isn't the only one. That's what brought the League together, Himiko continues. We all didn't fit. We all wanted to change something, to do something, but we had no idea what or how. And then, instead of going insane or on a random murder spree, we met you. A person who doesn't judge us by our past, or by our quirks. A person with ideals that we could follow. A leader. Don't feel bad about having those ideals. Besides, she chuckles slightly, after seeing All Might in person, I must admit he's awesome. Your dog is more awesome, though. What follows is a session of laughter interspersed with crying. And that is where I work on my secret evil plans, Izuku announces while Himiko eyes the room curiously. It is quite spacious, with a desk on the computer and a large bookstand filled with its hero and villain analysis notes on one end. The other end are two bookshelves with rather diverse content. Oh, wow. Himiko is shocked. That is the biggest collection of villain merch I've ever seen. Having it in the room next to my own is kind of ironic, Izuku sighs. And most of these stuff are figurines I made myself. Actual villain merch is illegal and tends to be of inferior quality. I refuse to settle for inferior quality. He has standards, after all. There are like 200 figurines here. Himiko looked at him with a combination of terror and surprise. She's almost correct. There are only 191 figurines in the room. You made them all yourself? I'm a bit of a fanboy. I'm not sure if you noticed, he replies, and she laughs. The left bookshelf is the villains that I personally disagree with and dislike, Izuku decides to explain, plus the heroes that I believe are pretty much villains in disguise. They can both see a Thunderbolt figurine on that shelf. On the right are the ones that I personally look up to, or at least that I think had a point. No all-for-one figurines. Izuku respects him as a father figure. He is genuinely doing his best, even if a lot of more law-abiding citizens would disagree. But his villain history is questionable. Extremely so. You don't get called the symbol of evil without being a genuine monster. The lack of his figurine meant that Izuku doesn't have to ask himself what bookshelf it belongs to. He himself certainly isn't sure why. He knows that he should hate his father's handiwork, but somehow he just can't. At least, not when he regularly sees the man in question go mellow when Eri pops up in his room. This bothers him at night sometimes. Wait, is that? Himiko notices it, of course. Meta Liberation War? On the right bookshelf? She didn't expect to see a famously rather quirkist book in the house of a person who used to be bullied for quirklessness. There was also the part with Gremlin's past that they both preferred not to touch. It is, Izuku replies with pride. Don't look at me like that, Himi. I dislike the ideology, and I am going to fight Redestro eventually. And you know why? Destro was much better, though. He fought for free quirk usage in the time when quirked people are discriminated against. If someone made him time travel to the modern day and showed him his descendant openly discriminating against the quirkless and those with weak quirks, Izuku shrugs, I don't think he'd be very happy about it. I should probably stop asking you questions, Himiko sighs. If I keep doing that, you'll give me a 10-hour-long lecture, and it's a bit too late for that. He blushes a bit. Sure, it is his favorite subject, but he wouldn't make it a lecture. Okay, maybe a short one. No, show me your browser history. She leaps towards his computer. No! Izuku panics, but thankfully it's a joke. Unfortunately, he fell for it, and when he catches up to her, she sees that he's laughing. So you do have some shameful bits in it, she laughs. I thought you were an innocent little cookie, but now I can see there's some spice in it. He does his best to appear innocent, though. Who is that, though? She decides not to mention the part of his desk occupied by the League of Villains members, but she does get curious over one figurine on the desk that she doesn't recognize, which is probably suspicious, as it's right next to the monitor in a rather exposed location. Thunderbolt was the second person that I killed. Certainly not something that a 16-year-old teenager should be saying, but he is living in cruel times. This is the first one. He was a villain who had a vision of a better world, but did horrible things to achieve it. I keep it here to remember him, and to remember that the ends do not justify all means. Well, the bird mask is cool, Himiko comments. What did he do? Kept Eri locked in a cell deep underground and harvested her blood to use her quirk to make anti-quirk bullets for more than a year. She stares at him with abject horror on her face. He wanted a world of equality, and he saw that quirks is something that made true equality impossible, and a form of disease. I still feel guilty for killing him, but I don't regret it. There's silence in the room for a while. Finally, Himiko speaks. I love you, but I'm going to stab you dead if you ever do something like that. Himiko, in general, had no problem with stabbing people, even stabbing them to death, but there were lines she clearly wasn't going to cross. That's good, Izuku replies with a smile. If he ever goes too far off, slaying him will be an act of heroism. The type he likes. It's probably best that he doesn't mention the he bled her dry and then put her back together with his quirk part, nor the one where he disassembled her into a blood smear and then reassembled her back as a form of punishment multiple times. It greatly helped the no regrets bit after he saw him slowly disassemble into a pool of blood in front of him, alternating between screaming curses and begging for his life. Overhaul died slowly, and he knew exactly why. Hey everybody, it's me again. Thank you for the great response to the first video. I was kind of worried people wouldn't like it. This fic is very, very long, and I'm trying to keep the videos around an hour just so that I don't dedicate whole swaths of my day to it. I only got so much time. It's about 62 chapters, over 250,000 words, and maybe I'll even finish it. We'll see. It's going to be a very long-term investment for me, so stick around if you're interested. I promise. Things are going to pick up very soon. No bloopers this time. I forgot to save them because I'm a genius and all that, but I'll have the next video ready sometime in the next couple of days, probably. I don't know. I'm really feeling like recording. So, I'll see you then. Take care.